She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came across a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought he'd best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about the cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed up on a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight wall behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. The Tale of Tom Kitten by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 3 little kittens, and their names were Mittens, Tom Kitten, and Moppet. They had dear little fur coats of their own, and they tumbled about in the doorstep and played in the dust. But one day their mother, Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, expected friends for tea, so she fetched the kittens indoors to wash and dress them before fine company arrived. First, she scrubbed their faces. Then she brushed their fur. Then she combed their tails and whiskers. Tom was very naughty, and he scratched. Mrs. Tabitha dressed Moppet and Mittens in clean pinafores and tuckers. Then she took all sorts of elegant and comfortable clothes out of a chest of drawers in order to dress up her son Thomas. Tom Kitten was very fat, and he had grown. Several buttons burst off. His mother sewed them on again. When the 3 kittens were ready, Mrs. Tabitha unwisely turned them out into the garden, to be out of the way while she made hot buttered toast. Now keep your frogs clean, children. You must walk on your hind legs. Keep away from the dirty ash pit, and from silly Haley Benny, and from the pigsty and the puddle ducks. Moppet and Mittens walked down the garden path unsteadily. Presently they trod upon their pinafores and fell on their noses. When they stood up, there were several green smears. Let us climb up on the rockery and sit on the garden wall, said Moppet. They turned their pinafores back to front and went up with a skip and a jump. Mr. Drake Puddle Duck, said Moppet. Come and help us to dress him. Come and button up Tom. Mr. Drake Puddle Duck advanced in a slow, sideways manner and picked up the various articles of clothing. But he put them on himself. He fitted even worse than Tom. It's a fine morning, said Mr. Drake Puddle Duck. And he and Jemima and Rebecca Puddle Duck set up the road, keeping step. Pit, pat, paddle pat, pit, pat, waddle pat. Then Tabitha Twitchit came down the garden and found her kittens on the wall with no clothes on. She pulled them off the wall, smacked them, and took them back to the house. My friends will arrive in a minute, and you are not fit to be seen. I am affronted, said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. She sent them upstairs, and I am sorry to say she told her friends that they were in bed with the measles, which was not true. Quite the contrary, they were not in bed, not in the least. Somehow there were very extraordinary noises overhead, which disturbed the dignity and repose of the tea party. And I think that some day I shall have to make another larger book to tell you more about Tom Kitten. As for the Puddle Ducks, they went into a pond. The clothes all came off indirectly because there were no buttons to hold them. And Mr. Drake Puddle Duck and Jemima and Rebecca have been looking for the clothes ever since. The end. The Tale of Samuel Whiskers, or the Roly-Poly Pudding. Once upon a time, there was an old cat called Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, who was an anxious parent. She used to lose her kittens continually, and whenever they were lost, they were always in mischief. On baking day, she determined to shut them up in a cupboard. She called Moppet and Mittens, but she could not find Tom. Mrs. Tabitha went up and down all over the house, mewing for Tom Kitten. She looked in the pantry up to the stairs, and she searched the best spare bedroom that was all covered up with dust sheets. She went right upstairs and looked into the attics, but she could not find him anywhere. It was an old house, full of cupboards and passages. Some of the walls were 4 feet thick, and there used to be queer noises inside them, as if there might be a little secret staircase. Certainly there was the odd little jagged doorway in the wainscot, and things disappeared at night, especially cheese and bacon. Mrs. Tabitha became more and more distracted, and mewed dreadfully. While their mother was searching the house, Moppet and Mittens got into mischief. The cupboard was not locked, so they pushed it open and came out. They went straight to the dough, which was set to rise in a pan before the fire. They patted it with their soft paws. "Shall we make dear little muffins?" said Mittens to Moppet. But just at that moment, somebody knocked at the front door, and Moppet jumped into the flour barrel in a fright. Mittens ran away to the dairy and hid in an empty jar on the stone shelf where the milk pans stand. The visitor was a neighbour, Mrs. Ribby. She had called to borrow some yeast. Mrs. Tabitha came downstairs mewing dreadfully. "Come in, Cousin Ribby, come in, and sit ye down. I am in sad trouble, Cousin Ribby," said Tabitha, shedding tears. "I've lost my dear son Thomas. I am afraid the rats have got him." She wiped her eyes with an apron. "He is a bad kitten, Cousin Tabitha. He made a cat's cradle of my best bonnet last time I came to tea. Where have you looked for him?" "All over the house. The rats are too many for me. What a thing it is to have an unruly family," said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. "I am not afraid of rats. I will got out of the cupboard. Ruby and Tabitha set to work to search the house thoroughly again. They poked under the beds with Ruby's umbrella, and they rummaged in the cupboards. They even fetched a candle and looked inside a clothes chest in one of the attics. They could not find anything, but once they heard a door bang downstairs. "Yes, it is infested with rats," said Tabitha carefully. "I got 7 young ones out of one hole in the back kitchen, and we had them for dinner last Saturday. And once I saw the old father rat, an enormous old rat, Cousin Ruby. I was just going to jump on him when he showed his yellow teeth at me and whisked down the hole." "The rats get upon my nerves, Cousin Ruby," said Tabitha. Ruby and Tabitha searched and searched. They both heard a curious roly-poly noise under the attic floor, but there is nothing to be seen. They returned to the kitchen. "Here's one of your kittens at last," said Ruby, dragging Moppet out of the flour barrel. They shook the flour off her and set her down on the kitchen floor. She seemed to be in a terrible fight. "Oh, mother, mother," said Moppet, "there's been an old woman rat in the kitchen, and she's stolen some of the dough." The 2 cats ran to look at the dough pan. Sure enough, there were marks of little scratching fingers, and a lump of dough was gone. "Which way did she go, Moppet?" But Moppet had been too much frightened to peep out of the barrel again. Ruby and Tabitha took her with them to keep her safely in sight while they went on with their search. They went into the dairy. The first thing they found was Mittens hiding in an empty jar. They tipped up the jar, and she scrambled out. "Oh, mother, mother," said Mittens. "Oh, mother, mother, there's an awful man rat in the dairy. A dreadful, enormous big rat, mother, and he's stolen the pat of butter and the rolling pin." Ruby and Tabitha looked at one another. "A rolling pin and butter, oh my poor son Thomas," exclaimed Tabitha, wringing her paws. "A rolling pin," said Ruby. "Did we not hear a roly-poly noise in the attic when we were looking into the chest?" Ruby and Tabitha rushed upstairs again. Sure enough, the roly-poly noise was still going on quite distinctively under the attic floor. "This is serious, Cousin Tabitha," said Ruby. "We must send for John Joyner at once, with a saw." Now this is what had been happening to Tom the Kitten, and it shows how very unwise it is to go up the chimney in a very old house, where a person does not know his way, and when there are enormous rats. Tom Kitten did not want to be shut up in a cupboard. When he saw that his mother was going to bake, he was determined to hide. He looked about for a nice convenient place, and he fixed upon the chimney. The fire had only just been lighted, and it was not hot, but there was a white, choky smoke from the green sticks. Tom Kitten got upon the fender and looked up. It was a big, old-fashioned fireplace. The chimney itself slanting slates that kept out the rain. Tom Kitten was getting very frightened. He climbed up and up and up, and then he waded sideways through inches of soot, like a sweep himself. It was most confusing in the dark. One flue seemed to lead to another. There was a lot less smoke, but Tom Kitten felt quite lost. He scrambled up and up, but before he reached the chimney top, he came to a place where somebody had loosened a stone in the wall. There were some mutton bones lying about. "This seems funny," said Tom Kitten, "who has been gnawing bones up here in the chimney. I wish I had never come. And what a funny smell. It is something like a mouse, only dreadfully strong. It makes me sneeze," said Tom Kitten. He squeezed through the hole in the wall and dragged himself along a most uncomfortably tight passage where he was scarcely any light. He groped his way carefully for several yards. He was at the back of the skirting board in the attic, where there is a little mark. All at once he fell, head over heels, in the dark, down a hole, and landed upon a heap of dirty rags. When Tom Kitten picked himself up and looked about, he found himself in a place he had never seen before, although he had lived his whole life in the house. It was a very small, stuffy, fusty room with boards and rafters and cobwebs and lamp and plaster. Opposite him, as far away as he could sit, was an enormous rat. "What do you mean by tumbling into my bed all covered with smuts?" said the rat, chattering his teeth. "Please, sir, the chimney wants sweeping," said poor Tom Kitten. Anna Maria," squeaked the rat. There was a pattering noise, and an old woman rat poked her head around a rafter. All in a minute she rushed upon Tom Kitten, and before he knew what was happening, his coat was pulled off. He was rolled up in a bundle and tied with string in very hard knots. Anna Maria did the tying. The old rat watched her and took snuff. When he had finished, they both sat staring at him with their mouths open. "Anna Maria," said the old man rat, whose name was Samuel Whiskers, "Anna Maria, make me a kitten dumpling roly-poly pudding for my dinner." "It requires dough and a pat of butter and a rolling pin," said Anna Maria, considering Tom Kitten with her head on one side. "No," said Samuel Whiskers, "make it properly, Anna Maria, with breadcrumbs." "Nonsense, butter and dough," replied Anna Maria. The two rats consulted together for a few minutes and then went away. Samuel Whiskers got through a hole in the wainscot, and went boldly down the front staircase to the dairy to get the butter. He did not meet anybody. He made a second journey for the rolling pin, and pushed it in front of him with his paws like a brewer's man trundle in a barrel. He could hear Ribby and Tabitha talking, but they were busy lighting the candle to look in the chest. They did not see him. Maria said she thought that it was of no consequence, but she wished that Tom Kitten would hold his head still as he disarranged the pastry. She laid hold of his ears. Tom Kitten bit and spat and mewed and wriggled, and the rolling pin went roly-poly, roly, roly, poly, roly. The rats held each at an end. His tail is sticking out. You did not fetch enough dough, Anna Maria. I fetched as much as I could carry, replied Anna Maria. I do not think, said Samuel Whiskers, pausing to take a look at Tom Kitten. I do not think it will be a good pudding. It smells sooty. Anna Maria was about to argue the point, when all at once there began to be other sounds up above, the rasping of a saw, and the noise of a little dog, scratching and yelping. The rats dropped the rolling pin and listened attentively. We are discovered and interrupted, Anna Maria. Let us collect our property and other people's, and depart at once. I fear that we shall be obliged to leave this pudding, but I am persuaded that the nuts would have been proved indigestible. Whatever you may urge to the contrary. Come away at once and help me to tie up some mutton bones and a counterpane, said Anna Maria. I have got half a smoked ham hidden in the chimney. So it happened that by the time John Joyner got the plank up, there was nobody under the floor except the rolling pin and Tom Kitten in a very dirty dumpling. But there was a strong smell of rats, and John Joyner spent the rest of the morning sniffing and whining and wagging his tail, going round and round with his head in the hole like a giblet. Then he nailed the plank down, and again, and put his tools in his bag and came downstairs. The cat family had quite recovered. They invited him to stay for dinner. The dumpling had been peeled off Tom Kitten and made separately into bag pudding with currants in it to hide the smuts. They had been obliged to put Tom Kitten in a hot bath. John Joyner smelled the pudding, but he regretted that he had not time to stay for dinner, because he had just finished making a wheelbarrow for Miss Potter, and she had ordered 2 hen coops. And when I was going to the post late in the afternoon, I looked up the lane from the corner, and I saw Mr. Samuel Whiskers and his wife on the run with big bundles on a little wheelbarrow, which looked very like mine. They were just turning in at the gate to the barn of Farmer Potatoes. Samuel Whiskers was puffing and out of breath. Anna Maria was still arguing in shrill tones. She seemed to know her way, and she seemed to have a quantity of luggage. I am sure I never gave her leave to borrow my wheelbarrow. They went into the barn and hauled their parcels with a bit of string to the top of the haymow. After that, there were no more rats for a long time at Tabitha Twitchet's. As for Farmer Potatoes, he has been driven nearly distracted. There are rats and rats and rats in his barn. They eat up the chicken food, and steal the oats and bran, and make holes in the meal bags. And they are all descended from Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Whiskers, children, and grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. There is no end to them. Muppet and Mittens have grown up into very good rat catchers. They go out rat catching in the village, and they find plenty of employment. They charge so much a dozen. They're living very comfortably. They hang up the rats' tails in a row on the barn door to show how many they have caught. Dozens and dozens of them. But Tom Kitten has always been afraid of a rat. He never durst face anything that is bigger